I'd like to begin with a story that happened to me as a client about 10, 12 years ago when I phoned into a call center. So I used to run a little management consultancy before I sold my soul to the sharp tip of the capitalist sword and joined the corporate. But back then I had a small complement of staff, and I had to make a payment to a few associates and some staff on a Sunday afternoon. So imagine it, it's Sunday afternoon, about 3 o'clock, you're phoning into a 24/7 call center. And the reason I was calling in was because the text message that had the number code that would allow me to get onto my online banking was not coming through on my phone. And you recall back in the day, I had a BlackBerry. I don't know if you had BlackBerries, but it took about the time it takes to grow corn to reboot the phone, just to get it to work. But that'll be, relevant in a moment. So I phone in, young woman takes the call, asks me a few security questions, and says, how can she help? And I explain the situation to her. She says, look, what I found is that if I turn my phone on and off, it reboots and re-registers with the cell phone tower, and the text message comes through. So I'll tell you what, how about, since I'm on your profile right now, you reboot your phone, and whilst it's rebooting, give me the payments you want to make, and I'll race Vodafone. So I said, okay, fine. She says, okay, ready, steady, go. I'm, give her the information. I'm rebooting the phone. Taking a while. We get through all the payments. As we finish the last payment, she overhears, do, 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 do. She shouts out, I won, I won. I thought to myself, okay, fine. Sounds interesting. She says, what else can I do for you today? I say, no, I think that's about it. She says, have a great Sunday, and anything else, call again. Puts down the phone. Put down the phone. I thought to myself, what just happened? I mean, it was an out-of-the-ordinary experience. Now, I don't know about you. I live here in London. Last week, I had to phone, I'm not going to name them, but one of the electricity suppliers. I sat on the phone for a long time to try and change my tariff, and the experience that I had was certainly not a race Vodafone experience. All right. So thinking back to that time and comparing the two, years ago, I would have said that the extraordinary experience that I had came from this incredible individual who I spoke to. How many of you would attribute this extraordinary experience of racing Vodafone in a call center on a Sunday afternoon? Think about that. Summer's day, by the way, okay, and the sun was out, to a specially talented young woman on the other end of that phone. Raise your hand if you'd have said, that's talent, and that's what you've got to look for. Come on. Okay. Years ago, I would have said the same thing. But I think that you and I are probably wrong. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Why we are probably wrong. You see, I'm not certain that the woman I spoke to, is especially talented. This is, by the way, compared to also the person that I spoke to at the electricity supply company last week. If I compare the two, I can't be certain that the one is talented and the other is not. So it's already someone saying it's the system. Why do I say that? Think about it for a second. Why do I say that? If we took the lady I spoke to, let's call her Mary, 10 years ago, and we transferred her out of that company and got her to work for the electricity supplier that I spoke to last week on the call center, would she have said, I'll race Vodafone? Those people who say no, raise your hands. Those people who say not sure, raise your hands. And those people who say yes, she still would have said it, and are certain of that, raise your hand. Well, there's your little immediate test. You see, so the question is, where is the talent? Because this is really an example of why it is more important to look at a company's environment, at the culture of the company in terms of what performance means, than it is to spend all your effort and energy searching for specially talented individuals or developing specially talented individuals. It is true, of course, that a particularly talented individual will bring value. But if you consider the example of these two call centers, moving the one person to the other or vice versa is more about the context that they're in than the individual themselves. And I have this argument with our CEO, who during induction, he likes to come to induction, and he does this wonderful talk, and he gets everyone excited at induction, and he says the following: we recruit special people, and you are those special people. That's what the CEO likes to say. And he gets very, very annoyed when I say, I'm not so sure. And we have this little argument. Because I say, well, you know what? Actually, all the companies are recruiting these special people. I have no doubt that you are the special people. But so are those in the other companies. There's this small talent pool. And I know this to be a fact because I'm a head of HR, so I do the analytics. And I can see that the people who leave us in 42 offices around the world, we have 16 offices just here in the UK, they leave us, they go to our competitors. And those that come to us come often from our competitors. So it's the same people, right? So if that's the case, that everyone's recruiting the special people, what makes the difference in terms of performance in the environment? And it turns out that it is the context you put those people in and the chemistry between that individual and the context that gives rise to the outcomes that you want to achieve. Now, think about this for a second. Think about all the effort in that your company places in creating performance. How much of that effort is focused at the individual level? Number one, let's find amazingly brilliant special people. And you create your competency frameworks and you're looking for these particularly talented and special individual. Because if we can find them, it'll make all the difference. Or number two, let's look at the people in the company and identify the talent. How many of you are subjected to that? Right? And which one are you in the quadrant? Are you the strong, stable performer or the super talent that gets selected for the special program? But we're focusing on these individuals. Compare the amount of investment, time, and consideration that we place in organizational life on finding and developing these special people compared to the same on creating the environment within which ordinary people, who are just special like everyone else, perform extraordinarily. How much effort are we placing on that? And I can tell you, I know this, from research at the university, but also within our organization and others that I've worked with over 25 years, we're out of balance. We're radically out of balance. Think about it in this way. What gave rise to that lady saying to me, let's race Vodafone? What were the conditions around her that gave rise to her behaving in that way with me? Think about her manager. Do you think her manager was a controlling type with a clipboard and a pen and a, kind of overbearing, say the right thing? Would you say more of that or less of that to give rise to that condition? Less. Okay, do you think that when she was trained on how to respond on calls, they had scripts that she had to memorize and she was required to say the following things for whatever the conditions were that came through? Or do you think they trained her to think as a human being and consider what the person needed within the rules and the products and services offered? Clearly the latter, yes? How do you think the person I spoke to at the electricity supplier was trained differently, was managed differently? And there you start to see these environmental conditions. Now, it turned out that I happened to eventually find my way to work for the company of the former lady, because that's, and as a little punt for my company, it was Investec's call center for the bank back 10 years ago. I ended up working. This is not a sales pitch for the company. Thanks, Justin. I probably didn't do the right thing to sell it. But it made me so curious about the culture of this organization, and there were some circumstances that led to me working there. And then I got a chance to actually go into that call center and see what those conditions were. And this is what I discovered. The first thing was it didn't look like a call center. What does a call center normally look like? These banks of tables with the people sitting on them. it actually looked like a kind of games room. And I saw people on the phone using one of those mobile mics, playing sort of putt-putt and throwing balls. There was free coffee and food. There was music, lots of light. There was an energy and a buzz. I think now, back to that time when I was just a client, when she said, I'll race Vodafone, and she said, I won, yes, she was talking to me, but at the same time, she was speaking to the buzz of the place she was in, because it was almost like a competition around those people on the phones on who could create the most buzz on a Sunday afternoon. Now we go back to the question, is she especially talented or not? She might be. She might well be especially talented. But the conditions we placed her in gave her the opportunity to deploy that talent. So the best equation is to find the most talented people you can. Of course, I'm not suggesting that you don't do that. But it doesn't make a difference if they are super talented and you put them in a sweatshop. And ironically, and this is really where the rubber hits the road on this, if you take ordinary people like me, like you, but you put them in an extraordinary environment, the outcome you get is often extraordinary performance. That's why actually the trick in the 21st century is not about finding special individuals and developing special individuals who make the difference and growing these incredible heroic leaders. No, because the equation doesn't work as well in that direction. Because even when you get all of them, you don't put them in the right context, you get a negative outcome. Actually, the work is to create a culture, an environment that is extraordinary. And then, even the most ordinary of us will perform extraordinarily. And yes, if you're super talented, my God, are you going to produce the best results there as well. So what I talk about mainly, my work is focused on this central idea and how it affects all of organizational life. Recruitment, development, leadership, organizational design, strategy, and generally people practices. And if we look at the revolution that's happened from the 20th century into the 21st century, it has been, in many respects, based in the idea that we stop thinking only at the individual level. We do think at the individual level, but not only at the individual level. And we start to think about performance, about competition, about differentiation in the market at the organizational or system level. And that our efforts are at the collective awareness more so than at the individual awareness. And I'll just give you one little example of this. Think about leadership development. In leadership development, we select like a leader from this team, a leader from that team, a leader from over here, and we put them together in a little group, and then we teach them some stuff, and then we send them back into this environment. Do you know what research suggests the ROI is on leadership development programs? And I apologize to any of the people here who are teaching and doing leadership programs. It's really, really low. Depending on different studies, you know, it's like 15 to 20% at best of the investment gets a return, and often you get nothing. But people still say they enjoyed it because they felt, you know, they learned something about themselves. But in terms of commercial outcomes, people going these programs generally don't deliver improved commercial outcomes. And it must be true because there was music with that point as well. So why is that? That is because we are working at the individual level. So here's the metaphor. Let's say you have a fish tank. That's your company, and the fish are the individuals in the company. And there's a thing about, well, you know, we are not performing or competing at the level we want. What we should do is, you know, we've got to take a fish out one by one or groups of 10. Then we clean the fish and we teach the fish some tricks. And then, you know, we put them back and we keep doing that. And that'll make us better, right? And no one is checking if the water is contaminated. Because it's actually the water that the fish are in that is very, very critical. And that is such a common mistake in industry now that, you know, there are times in which you are literally wasting money and time and not understanding why you aren't getting the outcomes. All right, so I'm going to end here with a final kind of sub-point. And, we can do another whole talk about this, but because I just want to be short, I'm just going to give you this. So, point number one, which is the main point for this morning, is that we need to focus on the context, environment, or culture, whichever one you use, to produce the performance, because you get many-fold better outcomes than just focusing at the individual level. You got that piece, right? Okay, now there's a sub-point. Even when you do want to focus at the individual level, which you should do, because it is important. I mean, the lady I spoke to, if she was, really, really poor and, not switched on, no matter whether she was in that context or another, I would have got a negative outcome, yes? So, of course, we still have to be concerned for the individual. It turns out that when you look at what makes especially talented individuals, we've also been making huge mistakes there. And the biggest one we've made is the idea that there are a set of generic competencies that make someone excellent. Emotional intelligence is high. They're a good listener. They can see into the future and plan appropriately. If you pick competency frameworks from all the top companies around the world, you see the same things. And all recruiters are using this to try and find the right people. But it turns out that that is also not entirely true. Because sometimes what you think is the right person is the wrong person. Sometimes when you have an environment and you go, someone who's a really good listener will do well here. But it turns out that the research shows that sometimes what's needed in this time for this team in this context is someone who's actually not a good listener. Someone who's actually a good teller. To say, okay, it's enough now. It's time for you to get your running sneakers on and get in on the streets and start selling. And I don't want to hear another word about it. And someone who goes in as a good listener gets a negative outcome. And sometimes the reverse is true. Yes? And it's very hard to be a good listener and a good teller at the same time. So we find that people are individuals and they have a unique kind of makeup. And I'll end with this story just to illustrate the point. This is my final story. Think about Winston Churchill. Arguably one of the greatest leaders of the 20th century. Time magazine said he was the greatest leader of the 20th century. And here we are in England. I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of knowledge about Churchill, a lot of support for Churchill. Raise your hand if you think Churchill is an example of an exceptional leader. Great. When you do these leadership programs, which I've done for 25 years, and you say, please put up the top 5 best leaders, you know that one. Churchill's always in there, right? Okay. Well, let's just check. If you had interviewed Churchill and you didn't know who he was for a job, you would have had someone with a patchy academic record who was rude, a very poor listener, right? Okay, right? Definitely was not considered supportive and emotionally engaged with the people to help them around him. Yes? Prone to the odd, yes? Dark moods. I mean, right? Would you have employed him if you didn't know who he was? You wouldn't have got past your first recruitment interview. Okay. Something to think about there, right? And actually, before the war, he was a pariah politically. During the war, greatest leader of the 20th century, arguably. And then after the war, what happened? Effectively, everyone booted him out. So is he a good leader or a bad leader? You see, that's a trick question. Why is it a trick question? Because it's the wrong question. And that's what I'm going to end with. So the second and final point I make is that even when you look at the individual level, we're asking the wrong question. What makes a good recruit? What makes a good leader? What we need to say is, again, what is the context that we are in? And what is needed in this context from an individual? And match that individual to that context. And to end, Churchill from the point of view of World War II, was a perfect match as a leader for that context, and thank God, here we are today. Okay, we're going to end in that. Thank you very much.